Einen schönen guten Abend.
Okay, good evening to everyone.
Mein Name ist Markus Steinbach. Ich
My name
bin
is Markus
Leiter des Referats
Kleinbach. I'm the head
Auslands
of the
Akademischen
Eastern
Auswärtigen
European Department at the Catholic
Heute
Academic
Abend
Service for
Ihr Moderator.
Foreigners, and tonight I'm
Wir
serving as
haben,
your host.
wie aus der Einladung wissen,
And
3 Gäste,
we have three
die ich Ihnen
guests,
jetzt
as you
kurz
know from
vorstellen
the
möchte, und
invitation. I
dann
should like to briefly
werden wir
present them
mit
to
einer
you and
Eingangsfrage
introduce them to
einsteigen
you, and then we will have
und
an
dann hoffe ich, dass
introductory
nach dem
question
Schluss
and
ganz
hope
viele
later
Fragen
on there will
stehen,
lots of questions in the
die wir
chat
in die Diskussion einbringen können.
that we can include in our discussion then.
Unsere Dame im Panel ist die Frau Dr.
So
Cornelia Kisch.
Dr.
Sie
Cornelia
hat
Kish is our
2011
lady
an
in
der
the panel. So
Universität
in the
einen
2011,
Abschluss in den
she
Fächern
graduated
Jura
at
und
the University of
Rechtswissenschaften
Pech
gemacht.
in Law and Political
Sie ist
Science.
Mitbegründerin
So she's a
und freie
co-founder
Mitarbeiter
and a
der
freelancer
noch unabhängigen
of the
ungarischen
still
Wochenzeitung
independent
Radio Hang
Hungarian
und
weekly
arbeitet
Magyar Hang.
zurzeit
And
als
currently
Ungarn-Korrespondentin
she's working as a
für
Hungary correspondent
Eurotopics
for
und
Eurotopics.
ist als Ostbloggerin für den
And
Mitteldeutschen
she's the
Rundfunk
East blogger
und andere
for the
deutschsprachige Medien
Mitteldeutsche
tätig.
Rundfunk, so
Sie
a
war
TV and radio station
für den
in
Jahrgang
Germany.
des
She had a
European
scholarship
Journalism
with the
Fellowships an
European
der Freien
Scholarship
Universität Berlin,
Journalism Fellowship at the Free
hat
University
am
of Berlin.
Europäischen Journalismusobservatorium
And
mitgemacht
she cooperated in the
und
European
ist
Journalism
Teilnehmerin eines
Observatory, and
Kurses des
she's a
katholischen
participant of a course
Publizisteninstitutes IFP
of the
in
Catholic
München.
Institute IFP for
Der zweite
journalists in
Teilnehmer
Munich.
ist der
The
Erzabis Cyril.
second candidate
Ähm,
or participant tonight
Erzabis
is
Cyril ist
Archabbot
1997 direkt nach
Cyril.
dem
In
Abitur für 1,5
1979,
Jahre lang als
directly after
Studienrat
his
bei
A
Pannonhalm und
levels,
der
he
Benediktinischen
stayed
beigetreten.
in Pannonhalma
Er
and
hat
joined the
dort
Benedictines
Religionspädagogik
teens,
studiert,
and so
ist
he
zum Priester
studied
geweiht worden
religious
und hat
pedagogics, and so he was ordained
noch
then as a priest.
Geografie
And then he also studied
und
geography,
Theologie auf Lehramt
theology,
studiert, weil
theology to become a
Pannonhalma auch
teacher,
eine große Schule
because
hat. Er war
Pannonhalma
eine Zeit
also
lang
has
dort
a
als
large
Lehrer
school,
tätig
and so he worked
und
there
noch
for
in
a while as
verschiedenen
a
anderen
teacher
Funktionen
and had
und
different other functions as well
war danach
in the
Prior in
congregation. And then
Pannonhalma
he was the prior in
zuständig,
Pannonhalma,
dass
and he was in
das Kloster
charge
Pannonhalma jetzt eine
of the fact that the
wirtschaftliche
monastery of
Stabilität hat.
Pannonhalma
Und das hat
has
sich auch auf andere
financial stability,
Benediktinergemeinschaften
and
und Häuser in Ungarn übertragen.
this also was
Er
transferred
ist
to other
2018
congregations in
zum Erzarzt ernannt worden.
Hungary, and he was
Und der dritte in der
appointed as
Runde
Archabbot in
ist der Professor
2018,
Dr. Gergely
and the
Rasta.
third is Professor Dr.
Er
Gabriel
ist
Rasta.
Professor für Soziologie
He's a
an der
professor for
Griechisch-Katholischen Peter Pashmani
sociology at the
Universität
Catholic Peter Pashmani
und
University,
derzeit mit einem
and
Forschungsaufenthalt
currently he has a
in
research
Münster und
stay at
hat
the
jetzt ein
University of
Fellowship am
Münster, and
Exzellenzcluster Religion und
he
Politik.
has a fellowship at the
Er
Excellence
hat an
Cluster
der
of
Wirtschaftsuniversität in
Politics and
Budapest
Religion. And in
Mittelschwerpunkt
Budapest,
Soziologie und
he
Außenpolitik
studied
studiert und ist an der
sociology and foreign
Corvinus-Universität
affairs, and at the
ebenfalls in
Convenius
Budapest zum
University
Thema
at university
Religiosität, politische
he,
Attitüde und
religious
Säkularisation in Westeuropa promoviert worden.
religiosity and
Herzlich
political
willkommen heute
attitude. This
Abend.
is how he was
Ich habe ja
received
mit
his
einigen
PhD.
abgesprochen,
So I
dass ich zuerst eine Eingangsfrage stelle und ich möchte
so
gerne mit Ihnen, Herrn Dr. Roster,
so I
anfangen,
should like to start with you, Dr.
dass wir
Roster,
so ein bisschen in die Politik Ungarns einen
so
Einblick
that
nehmen.
we get
Denn
some
von
glance
außen
into the
gesehen
politics of
scheint sich ja
Hungary,
Ungarn immer
because
mehr
from
von
the
der EU zu
outside,
entfernen
Hungary seemed
und
to
geht
distance itself
ein
more and more
wenig
from
auf
the European
Konfrontationskurs
Union
bei vielen
and
Themen.
well, shows some confrontation
Allerdings
with
hat
lots of
Orbán ja
topics.
doch eine ziemlich große
However, Orban
Rückhalt im
has
Land.
quite a lot of
Können Sie uns
support
ein
in the
bisschen versuchen
country.
zu erklären,
So could
wo
you
die Rückhalt
explain a little
herkommt und
bit where does the support
warum
come
Ungarn auch
from,
versucht,
and why does Hungary
so sehr
try
auf der eigenen Souveränität zu bestehen?
to really insist on its own
Okay, ja, sehr gerne.
sovereignty?
Das ist
Well, thank you for having
gar nicht so
me.
einfach
So
Frage.
this is not such an easy introductory question, really.
Ich würde damit anfangen,
And
dass ich gerade
I would like
heute
to start with
das Ergebnis einer
with telling you that I've seen the results of a new survey
neulich
even
zum
today,
Samstag gesehen habe oder gelesen habe.
or I read them
Laut
today, these
diesen
results, and
Ergebnissen
the results said
3/4 der Ungarn,
that three
dass
quarters
ein
of all
Brexit
Hungarians
oder Hungarian Exit
uh, are,
Abstimmung gäbe
would vote for an
für den
Hungsit, so an
Verbleib im Rat
Hungarian
der EU
exit, so for
stimmen
leaving
würde.
the European
Und das
Union.
ist nichts Neues.
So this
Wir
is nothing
haben
new.
seit
So
dem Beitritt von Ungarn in
since
die EU
the Hungarian
oder sogar noch
accession
seit
into
Jahren
the EU,
davor
or even
immer eine
before,
klare Unterstützung
we always had a
der
clear
Mehrheit der Bevölkerung
support, or the
für
majority
einen
of the people were
EU-Beitritt und auch
in favor of an
zur
accession
allgemeinen
to
EU
the European
gehabt.
Union.
Was interessant noch an dieser
So what is
Umfrage war,
interesting
dass
now with this survey was that the voters of Fidesz, the government party of Viktor Orbán, are clearly also in favor of the EU. So sorry, 3/4 voted that they would like to stay with the EU, not leave. And so the question was, would you also vote in favor of the European Union if Viktor Orbán started a campaign against the European Union? Of course, this is all very hypothetical, but nevertheless, a clear majority of the Fidesz voters said that even in this case, they would vote for staying within the European Union. And so this means that despite all these political confrontations between Hungary and the European Union, and so as we say in Hungary, between Budapest and Brüssel, there's a clear support as regards the overall population. Nevertheless, there are lots of voters that vote for Viktor Orbán. Nevertheless, so then the question is, how can we explain that Viktor Orbán in 22 won the elections for the fourth time and with a majority of 2/3? And so this has several reasons, of course. One thing is that explains it is our electoral system. So you need less than 50% of the votes to then have a 2/3 majority in the parliament. So even with less than 50% of the votes, you can have a 2/3 majority. So after 2010, after the fact that when Orbán came into power, it was still changed the electoral law in favor of Fidesz. But you have to see there are also other reasons. Orbán is popular in certain circles, so we cannot say that all the Hungarians are like this or like that. So that he has a very stable votership, and he tries to bring them behind him with all sorts of means and maintain them there. And so with all means, it means that he has very strong state propaganda in public media and also in part of the private media, also with certain social measures, for example, strong subsidies for families. And we also have to see that Hungary, since the year 2010, has had a successful economy similar to other Eastern European countries. And this is mainly due to the fact that they were heavily funded by the European Union. But this is something that not all voters are aware of, or if they are aware of that it's not so important for them. So until 2020, I would say that we had really a constantly increasing economy, and now recently Orbán experiences his first bigger crisis. And there was one serious candidate as the head for the opposing party, and like 1 year ago, this person was still very unknown. So it's not the situation that it's only monolithic, the Hungarian politic, that it cannot be changed at all whatsoever. But it's also clear that these 14 years of reign of Fidesz and Orbán, that this of course had a strong impact on the country, led to big changes, which were done deliberately, and it has to do with the electoral law, for example, and the rearrangement of democratic institutions. And probably
Macht
it's going to
wechseln.
be very
Vorfinden, aber
difficult
das
to really
werden wir in
bring another
2026 sehen. Noch
party
ein
into
Satz.
power. But we will
Äh,
see this in 2026.
Ungarn,
And still one
und
other
Orbán betont
remark.
das sehr gerne, ist ein
Hungary and
Land der
Orban likes to
Freiheitskämpfer
underlie this.
und
It's
bekämpfen.
a
Wir haben
country
in
of
unserer Geschichte
freedom fighters.
oft mit
So in our
irgendwelchen
past,
äußeren Mächten
we were
gekämpft, oft
always
nicht sehr
fighting or
erfolgreich,
struggling
aber
against
trotzdem sind diese
powers from the outside, not always successful.
Ereignisse unserer
But
Geschichte gegen
the
Österreicher,
most
gegen
important
Türken,
things
gegen
are against the
Russen. Und
victories
Orbán
against the
wäre sehr gerne
Austrians, the
auch
Russians,
symbolisch
and
auf diese
the Turks. And so
Freiheitskämpfer
Orban likes
zurückbringt.
to
Er positioniert sich
play with
als
this
ein
symbolism, and
Nachfolger
so this is how he enacts
Freiheitskampfsymbol
himself as a kind
gerade
of a
ist, der
successor of these
äh,
freedom fighters.
durchführt. Man muss auch sehen,
And we also have to
seine
see
Wählerschaft sind
that in
ältere,
his
wenig
electors
gebildete
are
Menschen, die
rather
in kleineren
elder people,
Ortschaften wohnen,
maybe
die
not so well educated
eindeutig überrepräsentiert. Für
in
sie
smaller
sind
villages, the rural areas.
staatliche Medien, die
So for
außerhalb
them, public
Informationsquelle,
media, this is their
Anbindung
first
aus
source of
Bildung,
information. They do not have so much experience
ausländische Verhältnisse
with,
außer aus
with
dem
situations
Fernsehen, was sie
abroad.
gehört. Also das heißt, sie sind auch stärker
So
für solche staatliche
they
Propaganda anfällig.
so
Vielleicht so viel
they are
zu.
more susceptible for this
Ja,
state
herzlichen Dank für
propaganda.
diese erste
So
Einschätzung
thank you very much for this
zur
first
Lage in Ungarn.
assessment regarding the situation in
Jetzt
Hungary. So Archabbot Cyril.
nach der Politik ein Blick auf die Kirche.
After politics, now let's have a look at the church. Pope Benedict asked the Hungarian bishops not to focus so much on material things, but more on spiritual development. And also Pope Francis showed this when he visited you, so that we have more pastoral care, more a closer relationship to the people in the country. So Pope Francis referred to that mainly as regards the refugees and other social challenges. So what is the situation in Hungary at the moment? So how does the Catholic Church deal with these challenges? What is their position and what do they do? So thank you very much for the invitation as well. I think at the beginning or up to now, the church institutions were rather this was the main point, that to expand that more than working out a pastoral strategy. So the church has started with this now, that primary schools, secondary schools, professional schools, that we have that. And in this respect, we have achieved quite a lot, especially after 2010. So the churches and institutions have increased in numbers. Maybe I can give you some figures. In 1990, it was only 3,000 young people that were able to attend church schools, and nowadays it's more than 150,000. And this, of course, also means that the Catholic Church has almost 400 institutions for general and professional education. So the Catholic Church is really proud of that, because this way you can reach many people, families, not just the children, but the families that stand behind that. And of course, they're not only schools, but also homes for the elderly that are organized by the church. And we take care of many people there. And we have to know that before World War II, the church had been very strong in this respect. And how are we present in society? How can we become more and more useful in society? So these questions have been asked, and this way we founded so many institutions now. And pastoral strategy, that would be an important focus point now. And there's still a lot to be done in this area, a lot to be improved. Of course, we have a pastoral institute in Hungary of the Bishops' Conference, and it promotes tried and tested practices on their website. You can ask questions and reach out to people. But it's not well, so important. The individual dioceses have their pastoral strategies, but there's not no such thing for the whole of Hungary, as far as I know. Of course, several dioceses have started with diocese synods, and this was very important. It was always about the future of the church. How do we plan that? How can we include the people? What would be important for us? But it's also very diverse. There are dioceses where they have done things like that with more or less success, and then there are dioceses where they not have not even started with this. And I think there's a big difference in Hungary between the communities or parishes in these smaller and smaller rural areas, and then there are very lively parishes with a large number of people in the cities, not just in the capital, but also in other bigger agglomerations. And and there's also a big difference how a priest and the members of the church council, what kind of tasks they have to do. But a pastoral focus, this is still something that is not really given. Well, just a short question to you. As regards to refugees, the refugee crisis, is the church active in this area? What does the church do for the refugees? So I would make a difference between the refugees from Africa or the whole world and Ukrainians. So with the Ukrainians, it's a different situation for us because it's a neighboring country. And but in general, refugees, from my point of view, the position of the Hungarian government has not changed in this respect. And I would say in society, also in the church, and also church goers, they have that people are very opposed to the refugees, very hostile towards them. Or maybe let me rephrase, they are afraid, they think in cliches. And of course, this is something that this is also supported by government, right? They because the government says there could be terrorists among the refugees, that they would not be able to integrate into the society, that they have other cultural habits, that they bring along diseases and so on. And therefore, sometimes people ask, do we still have jobs when we take up so many refugees? And so the media, of course, do not help here. They even more stir up the situation even more. So also among the believers, there are a lot of question marks. But many things have also been done. So it's not just a negative attitude. So, and we have to corroborate that. Hungary is not really the prime target of or destination of refugees, but in former times when they were on the road, be it be in Budapest or in the train station of Győr. So when there were huge amounts of people, then they received assistance from us, from our teachers, our students went there and helped them, and they were got reception there. And so we also hosted some families that were in a difficult situation. So there is a readiness of the population that has always been there. So the Caritas also helped. So a co-brother, so a natural brother of one co-brother. He's a ophthalmologist in Congo, and he got a lot of help from Hungary Helps movement, the Hungary Helps movement. So what we say is to rather help in the areas of crisis than here on the spot in Hungary. Okay,
kritisch. Wir haben
thank you, Dr.
jetzt
Kish.
ein bisschen die politische Einschätzung
So
gehabt,
we
wir
had a
haben ein
look
bisschen
at the
auf die
political
Kirche
side,
debattiert.
the church side, and now
Wie sieht das aus der
what
Bevölkerung
would you say?
heraus?
What is
Welche
the
Beziehung hat
situation of the
die Bevölkerung
population?
noch zur Kirche?
So what kind of
Wie
relationship does the
akzeptiert
church
sie
still have
die
with
Haltung der Kirche oder
the
das,
population
was
still have
Kirche
with the
tut?
church? How much do they
Ähm,
still accept what the church
Ist
does?
das jetzt immer noch hat die Kirche Zulauf oder
So
haben wir ähnliche
are there still people coming to church, or do we
Dinge
have
wie in Deutschland,
similar
dass Kirche
situations like in
immer
Germany,
weniger
for
Zulauf hat?
example, that fewer and
Also
fewer people go to the
wie sieht
church?
das aus mit der Bedeutung der
So
Kirche in der Gesellschaft, wenn man
how
das jetzt
about
mal
the
aus dem
importance
Blickwinkel der
of the
Journalistin oder der
church
Bevölkerung sieht?
from your point of view as a journalist?
Ja, also auf diese Frage kann man mit Daten und Fakten auch
So we have
antworten.
dates and facts
Und
for
in
these
diesem Bereich ist
questions, and so
Herr
in this
Rosta als
area,
Religionssoziologe
and
natürlich
Mr.
kompetenter.
Rocha is
Als
the
Journalistin kann ich
religion
auch
and
ein Experte, wenn es um
sociologist,
die
so,
Zahlen
so
geht.
I will
Sehr,
ask him for
sehr
the figures,
formuliert
but
kann man vielleicht
roughly
sagen,
said, we can say
was aus den Zahlen hervorkommt, ist,
what we can
dass
see
Ungarn
from the figures is that if we have a regional comparison, Hungary is somewhere in the center. There are certain areas that are more religious, like Poland, for example, but there are others that are less religious. So Hungary is somewhere in the center there. And as a journalist, I have to add that similar to other areas in Hungary, also in this area, there is a certain lack of information. So if we have a look at Germany, which what I did a couple of years ago for some research, you find very extensive data on church memberships, number of people that have been baptized, and how many visits are there at mass, for example. And in Hungary, it's not so obvious, as far as I know. At that time, I asked the churches this question. I think that was 2 years ago or so. So, how many people actually still attend Mass? So, I asked the Roman Catholic and the Protestant and the Reformed Church and asked them for data. And the Protestant Church was the only church that forwarded a spreadsheet with all data, and the others didn't, or they just shared very few data. And so there are also surveys with different results, and also the results of the census. And so the question arises, which kind of data should be taken into consideration if you want to assess the connection of the society with church. So this is really a complex question. During the census, for example, a large number of people did not give an answer to the question what kind of church they belong to, what kind of denomination they have, which is an interesting phenomenon. And but this doesn't tell us a lot about what the people actually think about the churches.
Allerdings, und das ist schon meine Meinung und meine Erfahrung,
However,
meine
and
Einschätzung.
this is my experience, my opinion, the church for a large part of society the church is still important as kind of a moral instance, but this is not just per se in general. So if critical people make a statement in the name of the church, or if the actions of the representatives of the church are credible, then this is perceived in a positive way, and not just only among those that are religious. But the question is, who actually needs what to perceive somebody as authentic? So, of course, we have a division in the country at the moment, and so this division also has an effect on the perception of church. I just can give you some examples from my work as a journalist with a weekly magazine that I work for in Hungary. For every church holiday, for example, for Christmas or Easter, we try to have representatives of the church on the front page. And so this showed that certain representatives of the church can cause a lot of interest, steer a lot of interest among our readers. If our readers get the impression that they are independent of the political mainstream, that they are socially sensitive. So from my point of view, there is a huge claim for empathy.
Die soziale Sensibilität.
Social sensitivity. And if people fulfill this, then these people are perceived as a moral compass. And then our readers say, yeah, this interests us. And especially if we deal here with a representative of the church. And another important role the church has is that it is independent of religious matters, so the social mission of the church. So I think two important questions come up here. One question is, what kind of effect does it have on the perception of the church that the government really strongly supports the church and does a lot at the moment to enable the churches to take over public tasks like education or many other different tasks in the social aspect. And from my point of view, this is something that is also dividing the society, not always, but very often. And the other question that comes up is, and that I ask myself, is whether churches communicate enough of what is actually done in the social field, what they actually perform, how they perform there. So sometimes there are personalities that incorporate these efforts, or but of course they also do many other things that people are not aware of.
Okay. Dann habe ich das dann so richtig verstanden, dass die den Eindruck von der
Okay,
Zeitung
have I
haben,
understood you correctly that you got the impression from the newspaper that the church has more impact via charismatic people and not the institution of this church? Yes, I think this is a very important factor. And as I've mentioned before, Hungary is really divided. We have these certain bubbles, these filter bubbles, and it happens quite often that the people want to hear their own opinions repeated by church representatives or the media. So different societal groups can have different claims if it's about the churches and the activities of the church. But basically,
die Aspekte, die ich hier aufgezählt habe,
the aspects that are listed here that are important to our readers,
wenn diese von einem Vertreter der Kirche vertreten werden.
So if these views are represented by a representative of a church, then this creates higher interest. So, Mr. Rosta, from your point of view as a religious sociologist, can you add something here? So I like the summary of Ms. Kish really very much. So on the one hand, if we have a look at the position of Hungary as far as religious beliefs and the situation in Eastern Europe, then of course there are more religious countries. So Hungary is more one of the secularized countries. So closest maybe to Slovenia as far as the figures are concerned. So the attendance of Mass and the number of believers and so on. Traditionally, Romania is much more religious, Poland as well. As far as the trends are concerned, so it's rather decreasing more or less since the year 2000. However, as far as the church attendance is concerned, over recent years, we we have kind of a stable level, about 10%. Well, at least states that they go to church at least once a week. So if there was a church attendance counting as you have in Hungary, as you have it in Germany, or as they also have it in Poland, then maybe the picture would be clearer. Unfortunately, we do not have this. I can just confirm what Ms. Kish said. So there are some surveys or investigations that are taken from time to time. So if a religious sociologist has funds for that, but like this systematic approach or a systematic interest of the churches to really have a closer look from a sociological point of view of the situation of the churches, I don't see this interest with the churches. And for example, the census that had been mentioned, there has now an interest has come up because the figure came up with the 40%. 40% of the people did not answer the question whether they belong to a church. So this, you can interpret this in many different ways now. I don't think that all of them are really outside the church. I myself know people who told me, yes, I did not answer this question, although I go to church every week, because I'm critical against the government or the relationship between the church and the government. And I kind of don't want my vote to be used so that they even become bigger or something. And so this makes it difficult to assess the situation for sure. But we can also say that church statistics are not public. I know from some dioceses from annual reports, but whether they really extrapolated then to a national level and analyze that. Unfortunately, I don't know about this. What I should like to mention briefly, however, is the communication of the church. I think this is also very important. I think the church actually does a lot of things that people are not aware of. For example, help for refugees, so the Jesuits and whatsoever. So there, and also in other areas, social work. People are not all aware of that. So the church really does a lot, but now it's rather perceived that the church takes over more and more schools, and people see this positive or negative depending on where they stand. But in general, I would say that the communication of church with wide areas of society, so there's room for improvement. And secondly, and this corroborates what Ms. Kish said regarding charismatic church leaders. There has been a research by the Pew think tank. So they make surveys regarding religion, and so they had a survey on Eastern Europe, and they checked the image of the churches, and so they offered positive and negative images. And so what was interesting was that the church in Hungary had a very high ranking of a positive image. So they help the poor, those in need. So in social areas, it was perceived that they take over these tasks, but there was also criticism where say the church is a power tool, very close to the state, very close to the government.
Große Mehrheit der Bevölkerung, aber von einer
So
erheblichen
it's
Teil
not the large
der
majority of the people,
Bevölkerung
but a
vertreten. Also
considerable
natürlich nicht
part of
unbedingt die
the
gleiche, die zwei
population
Positionen einnehmen, aber
really
es gibt
thinks like this.
tatsächlich eine Überlappung. Aber das zeigt auch die Spaltung der
So
ungarischen
this again
Gesellschaft, die
shows
tiefe
the
Spaltung der
division,
ungarischen
the
Gesellschaft, so
deep
wie das
division
häufig
of the
wird.
Hungarian society.
Okay, Dankeschön.
Thank you very much,
Cyril, ihr seid ja
Cyril.
auch durch verschiedene wie siehst du das aus der pastoralen Seite?
So how do you
Ihr
see
seid ja
this from a pastoral
habt ja
point of
mehrere
view?
Vereine, ihr seid
So you have
habt seid
different
mehrere Kirchen vertreten.
associations,
Wie
you have
ihr das
different
mit
monasteries and so
der
on,
Gläubigkeit,
different
mit der
parishes. So how do you
Ich
see
halte
this?
die Zahlen auch sehr wichtig.
So I think the
Das
figures are really
Ergebnis der
important.
Volkszählung,
So the
Kirchenbesuch
results of the
und.
census
Aber mir ist
census
wichtiger,
and church attendance and
wie
so on.
tief ist der Glaube der
So for
Menschen.
me, it's
Die
more
Zahlen
important how
berichten
deep
über
is the
etwas
belief
anderes,
of
nicht?
the people.
Die Tiefe kann nicht so einfach
So
eingeschätzt werden.
it's not so easy to
Aber ich
put
spüre
how
immer
deep
wieder,
belief is into
dass
figures.
die Menschen
But I feel time and
erwarten die
again that
Antworten
people
auf ihre
expect
Fragen
answers to their questions,
hauptsächlich nicht mehr von der Kirche.
and mainly they don't expect these
Eher
answers anymore from
oder
the
vielleicht die
church.
meisten eher von der
So they rather
Wissenschaft,
expect
vom
them from science,
Sozialstaat und von
the
Bildung
social state,
und
education,
wollen sich
whatsoever.
selber verwirklichen.
So they want to, well,
Der heutige Mensch
realize their own
richtet
dream,
sich
more or
eher
less.
nach
And
seiner
today's human being
momentanen Stimmung.
is rather oriented at a current mood.
Ich beschäftige mich mit Jugendlichen. Ich bin
And
Lehrer.
I
zu
deal a lot
Hause.
with young people. I'm a
Für
teacher.
18-Jährige
So
unterrichte ich
18-year-olds,
Gesellschaftswissenschaft
so
und Biologie
social
und.
studies, biology,
Und ich spüre, dass die
that's what I
planen nicht
teach to them.
langfristig.
And what I notice is that they have no
Das
long-term
ist wieder
planning.
ein Phänomen.
So
Darauf
this is
sollten
another
wir,
phenomenon. And
in unseren Pastoral irgendwie antworten.
this is where we should find answers.
Wie tief ist der Glaube, wie gesagt.
So again,
Die
asking how
Zahlen sind
deep is the
wichtig, aber ich
belief.
habe bei
So again,
Pater
figures are
Kesi,
important,
ist ein Trappist
but
aus
Father
Australien,
Casey,
der
he's a
hat einmal
trappist from
geschrieben,
Australia.
lasst uns
He once
nicht von
wrote,
Zahlen
he said,
überfordern. Man fragt
don't
immer, wie
be
viel seid ihr
overburdened
und
by
was sind die
figures.
Einnahmen und.
People always ask, how many
Und
are
wenn
you?
die
What
Zahlen
is your
stimmen,
income?
dann
And if the figures are okay,
sagen wir alles
then we
okay,
say
aber
everything
das
is
ist
okay.
eben nicht der Fall.
But this
Vor allem bei
exactly is
uns.
not the case.
Eine pastorale Antwort
So a
auf die
pastoral
heutigen
answer
Fragen
to today's
habe ich
questions.
eigentlich noch kaum gespürt.
Well, I have
In kleineren
hardly
Nischen schon.
felt that. Maybe in
Vielleicht
some
gibt's
niches,
Bewegungen und
with
gibt's
little movements,
bei
maybe.
größeren Vereinen
But with
so
larger
Kreise,
parishes,
die
for
über
example, they
wichtige
have little circles
Sachen
that talk about
miteinander reden.
important
Aber
things.
dass es einmal Schwerpunkt wird bei
But
uns,
that
dass
this
wir
turns
die
into a focus,
Bischofskonferenzen
for
damit
example, that
beschäftigen
the
und
bishops'
sagen,
conference would
eben
deal
diese
with that
pastorale Fragen
and say,
werden
these
für
pastoral
die
questions,
Zukunft
what will they be
nützlich
for the
und
future? How
hilfreich.
can we make use of
So
that
weit
for the future?
sind
Well,
wir heute noch nicht.
I don't see this
Okay,
yet. We have not reached this level yet.
Ich habe da gleich eine Anschlussfrage, weil du hast
So I have another
von
question
Jugendlichen
to
gesprochen,
you.
mit denen
You talked about
mit denen
young
du
people
arbeitest.
that you work with.
Bei der Wahl in der Republik Moldau
So during the
2 Wochen
elections in Moldova now,
haben von den 18 bis 25-Jährigen
of the 18 to
nur 8%
25 years,
gewählt.
only 8% went to the elections.
Wie ist das Interesse, was du siehst bei den
So
Schülern, bei
how's
den
the
Jugendlichen, bei den
interest
jungen
of the young
Erwachsenen,
people, these young adults also?
ja, politisch zu betätigen,
So
ein Interesse an Politik
do you
und
have the
ein
feeling
Interesse
that
in der
they are
Gesellschaft?
interested in
Wo wollen die
politics?
hin, die
So
Jugendlichen?
where
Ganz
what do they
allgemein
want to
kann ich die
achieve?
Frage nicht beantworten,
Well, I
weil
cannot
ich
answer
sehe
these
eine
questions in
spezielle Schicht,
general because
die
I
bei
just
uns
see a
sind.
special
Und ich denke,
stratum of the
wir
society
Knaben,
that
die
comes
bei
to our.
uns
So
lernen,
that
ist
boys
eine
that come to our
Auswahl,
school,
was
I
nicht
think
so
it's a
sehr
it's a
typisch
kind of a
ist allgemein
selection that
auf
is
Ungarn.
not
Aber wir
representing the
haben
whole of
dort
Hungary.
Fachschulen,
But
wo wir nicht so
we
sehr
also have
präsent sind,
kind
aber
of
wo wir Träger sind.
specialist
Und da
schools where we're not so
tauche ich
present,
auch
but where we
immer
actually
wieder
are
auf.
the
Die sind
organizations,
schon, die unsere Hilfsgelder, die
the
halten es
organizing
für
entity.
wichtig, dass
And
sie
so
für
there are
die
some people
Gesellschaft
that think
etwas tun, dass
that
das
it's important
besser
that they
wird
do
in der
something for
Zukunft, in der
society,
Politik, in
that
der
society
Gesellschaft.
improves, politics improves.
Natürlich die Frage,
But the question is how we will go to with climate change, ecology. So for them, this is more important than for my generation, for example. So they would be kind of an option for the church. That would be an option to address the younger people and rely on them. I think they would be ready. So I see a lot of commitment among them, really.
Frau Kisch, okay, Herr Rosch hat auch die Hand gehoben.
Vielleicht hat was Frau Kisch dazu sagen. Ich weiß nicht.
Frau Kisch, wie erleben Sie das oder wie
So,
sehen Sie das?
Ms. Kisch, how do you experience that?
Ja, also ich würde gerne kurz auf die Aussagen
So,
von
would like to come back
Cyril reagieren
to
über
the
die
statements of
Zahlen,
Archbishop
weil,
Cyril regarding the figures.
über Zahlen und Diskussionen, weil ich das sehr wichtig gefunden habe, was Sie gesagt haben.
As regards discussions, for example.
Dass er sich die Frage stellt, ob es Diskussionen gibt darüber, wie die pastorale Arbeit Antworten auf die neuen Herausforderungen.
So discussions how the pastoral world should be able to give answers to the problems of today. So I can understand that discussions are very important, but generally this doesn't work out so well in Hungary. I will not say too much about the church or the public side of the church, because I'm not really an expert in this field, but as far as I can say, in Hungarian public, this is the case. Maybe also partly in the church public, that these wider discussions, these more critical discussions,
über alle nötige Themen
do not really take place regarding all the topics that would be necessary to be discussed. And so this also has to do with the discussion culture in Hungary, with openness and so on. But maybe to a certain extent, it also has to do with the figures. And so
einen Blick auf Deutschland geworfen habe, mache ich das relativ oft.
So when I compare this to Germany, which I do quite often, I say the figures are known. So many figures are very transparent there. So, and this is information that is shared also with the broad public, also outside the churches. So this leads then, of course, to many broad discussions. And I think this is good. Even if figures not everything, and even if figures do not really tell the whole truth. Mr. Roster, you also, yeah, you want to say, yeah, I work with figures. So, but nevertheless, I agree that the figures are not everything. They cannot tell you everything. And the deepness of the faith, this is something very difficult to put into numbers. But what I wanted to say is something different. So as regards to young people, but there are figures after all. So the age is one of the most important factors as regards the decision what to vote. So the younger they are, the more likely they will vote for the government party. And secondly, and this is something quite new, a new development, since this new party TISA came up. So the young people said if they voted, they would rather vote for this party. The problem is that we do not know so much about this new party. So there are quite a lot of scandals which are traumatized by German media.
Wahrscheinlich nicht unabhängig von der Interesse von Fidesz, aber das ist jetzt eine andere Frage. Es ist eine Partei, die neu gegründet wurde.
So this is a party that was recently founded.
Ehemaligen Fidesz-nahen Person geleitet wird, die
and the head is something who was close to Fidesz before. quite charismatic leader. And obviously, this seems to be attractive to younger people. So Fidesz has less than 10% support under those below 30 years. But the young people are not so politically active. Maybe not as bad as in Moldova now, but this is also a problem of democracy, for example, and of politics. How you can motivate younger people to really get involved in politics. So I had a look at the chat, actually, and there have come up two questions regarding the relationship between church and state.
Ihr habt vorhin gesagt, dass
You said
die
before
Kirche gerade im schulischen Bereich sehr viel Unterstützung durch den Staat bekommt.
that the church gets a lot of support from the state. And the other question is whether there are also areas where the Hungarian Bishop Conference is actually more contradicting the government a little bit, where they disagree with what the government says.
Damit zusammenhängt die zweite Frage.
The second question,
Bedeutung die Kirche für die Politik hat.
what meaning does the church have for politics?
Wie unabhängig ist die Kirche von den
So,
staatlichen Einflüssen?
how independent is the church from state influence, and where does it criticize the state? And where does the state actually attempt to really be very close with the churches? So, who did you ask this question? So let me get started maybe, and then of course the others could go back. So I think nowadays we have an interesting situation for the church, or the relationship between church and state, because the government thinks that the church is a strategic partner. A lot of they speak a lot about this. They support the churches financially and also morally. So this means that there's a close relationship. And if a relationship is too close, then it's very difficult to criticize someone. So it's not really a relationship of partners where criticism would be a natural part, where you say, what could I say openly? And many church leaders notice that they are listened to by the state, that they get subsidies and so on for church renovations, for new buildings and so on. And we also have to say that most Christians think it's good that the government defends these conservative values. And this is also a special situation for the church heads. But if the church allows the state to define what is Christian and what is not Christian, then this is problematic. If we do not react to that at all. So from my point of view, the church should strive more to delineate itself from all sorts of secular power and so on. But in some cases, this doesn't happen. I think in society, especially because of this good relationship with the government, people think that the churches are too loyal towards the church at the moment, towards the government at the moment. So even before we started this talk now, I considered when I said, when was the last time I heard criticism of the church against the government? Well, there are some voices. For example, recently a Jesuit wrote on Facebook, and he was quite critical. So there are some individual voices, but the Bishops' Conference officially I just can remember one example a couple of years ago, where Bishop Andras Veres, the president or the head of the Hungarian Bishops' Conference, in a sermon on Saint Stephen's Day, which is the national national holiday in Hungary. So in a sermon, he criticized the government policy as regards artificial insemination, because this does not harmonize with Catholic teaching. But this is the only thing that I can remember where the church officially and as a bishop and as the head of the Bishops' Conference, where they made this public statement. Otherwise, we do not really see a lot. And we also have to keep in mind, and I was not able to talk about this in my first round here, politics in Hungary does not only consist of Orbán. There's opposition, but they're not always best friends, and this is good for Fidesz, of course. But from 2002 to 2010, there was an opposition government, and the churches did not have the best experiences with their church politics at that time. So I can remember quite well some announcements where the parents and teachers really went down the street and to demonstrate. That they really wanted to have this support that was actually guaranteed to them by law. So things that had been laid down in the Vatican's agreement. So thank God I'm not a representative of the church, but I think for me it would also not be easy to decide if you have these two sides. Either they want to support me completely and hand over schools to me and make a lot of money available, and then on the other side we have these parties that are really even hostile to the churches. So how would you find a good balance there? But at the same time, we have to say there are critical voices among believers. I do not know the figures, because I don't know any survey about this. I don't know if they ever asked the believers, do you agree that we take over so many schools, for example? So if it's about one concrete school, then the local parents are asked, of course. This is regulated by law like this. But in general, what the believers think about this, I don't know that there has ever been any survey about this. Ms. Kish?
Ja, ich könnte sehr viel hinzufügen.
Well, I could add a lot, but
eher ein bisschen kürzer sein und
but I will keep it shorter and focus
wie es ist mit dieser Annäherung der Kirchen
how it is about this rapprochement between the church and the government. This causes a lot of criticism, of course.
Und also zum Beispiel, dass die Kirchen massenhaft Schulen übernehmen.
So that churches have taken over a huge number of schools. So from my point of view, many people see this in such a way that the church actually tries to expand its power. So there are these critical voices, and maybe we should keep in mind that within the church, even, there are voters that do not vote for Orbán or that disagree with Orbán's politics.
auch etwas anfangen, also die
And so
Kirchen,
they
weil diese Menschen
would
auch
also have to,
Kirchenmitglieder
so the
sind.
church would
Und
also have to
dazu
do something
würde
for
ich
those people because they are also church
Journalistin auch
members.
die kurze
And as a
Anmerkung
journalist,
machen,
I would like to
dass wenn
make the
ich
short
als
remark
Journalistin
that
viele Jahre lang systematisch und konsequent nur die Regierung kritisiere, aber
so
die
if I
Opposition gar
criticize,
nicht kritisiere, so
as a
denkt sie
journalist,
nur
if I
loben,
criticize
dann
the
werde ich
government
auf
the whole
irgendeinem
time and
Punkt
just praise the
auch
opposition,
meiner
that at some
Meinung nach auch
stage,
in den Augen meiner
then
Leser
my
meine
readers at
Glaubwürdigkeit
some point
verlieren.
would question my
Obwohl ich
credibility.
denke, dass es sich lohnt, ein bisschen,
So I think
also
it's really
für mich als
worthwhile
Journalistin ein bisschen langfristiger zu denken
to
und
think
manchmal, also
in a more
das,
longer-term perspective as a
darüber denke
journalist.
ich manchmal tatsächlich nach und
And
ich denke darüber nach, was passiert, wenn diese Regierung
And
oder diese Opposition
I
oder die
really give
beiden
thought
das ganze
to the
politische
question,
Establishment, das wir heute haben, nicht
what
mehr
will
da sein
happen
wird.
if this whole
Vielleicht,
political
es
establishment will
könnte
no
sich
longer
ganz
be
verändern
there?
in wenigen Jahren,
So
aber
everything
ich
could
werde
change
als
in a few
Journalistin
years,
trotzdem da
but
sein.
as a journalist, I will still be there, right?
Ja, also
So of course you have to always keep
vielleicht
this
ist
in
diese
mind.
Analogie ein bisschen, stimmt ganz nicht und ist ein
Maybe
bisschen
this is
grob
not
formuliert, aber
quite okay, this
trotzdem
analogy
finde ich
that I
es
was using
passend.
now, and maybe I was not too explicit, but I think this is still
Okay, danke
helpful.
für die Runde.
So thank you for this round.
Eine weitere Frage im Chat
Another question
geht
in the chat,
in den Bereich der pastoralen Arbeit,
the
beziehungsweise
pastoral work.
was ist mit den Leuten oder mit
How about
den Erwachsenen
the
im
adults
Alter zwischen 30 und 40, die in den
in the age
katholischen
group between
Kirchen waren?
30 and 40 that
Welche
went to these
Möglichkeiten haben sie, sich jetzt
secondary
in der Kirche zu
church
engagieren?
schools? What
Und
kind of
zwar
possibilities do they have to
jetzt
bring
als
themselves
vor allen
in
Dingen auch als
to the
gebildete,
church
studierte
life?
Laien, wo können sie sich in die Kirche
So as
einbringen?
lay
Was
people, how
gibt's da
can
für
they
Möglichkeiten?
get involved?
Ich meine, da sind die Diözesen auch
So
verschieden.
the dioceses are
Es
different
gibt
there.
mehrere Diözesen,
So there are
wo viele
many
ständige
dioceses
Diakone sind,
where we have
verheiratete Diakone.
married
Und von ihnen
deacons,
sind
for example,
wirklich, die meisten haben in katholischen Schulen die
and
Matura gemacht.
most of them did their A levels
Und
in Catholic
sie können
schools.
sich dort richtig engagieren, meiner
And so
Meinung
they
nach,
can really
sind
bring
auch,
themselves in
werden
very
Pfarren
well.
übergeben, wo sie eine
And
Gemeinde leiten
then they're also head
und
of a parish,
Kreatives,
for
Vieles und
example,
Gutes machen
and
können.
can do a lot of creative,
Aber
good
das
things.
ist nicht allgemein.
But this is not
Es sind
everywhere.
viele Diözesen, wo
So there are
überhaupt
many
keine Diakone
dioceses
sind.
where we have no deacons at all,
Der Bischof hält das für nicht wichtig und er
where the
sagt,
bishop
er kann
maybe
auch
thinks it's not so
sonst
important,
welche Leute beauftragen.
and it could ask
Aber
other secular
das ist
people
natürlich
about this.
nicht immer der Fall. Das hängt sehr von Pfarrern ab.
So this really
Von der
depends a lot of
Ortspaarung. Das ist
on the
eigentlich nicht
priests
allzu
and so
gut,
on.
weil
And I think this
wenn
is
ein
not good
Wechsel ist,
because if
jemand
this
hat sich
priest
von
leaves this
engagiert.
parish
Ich habe
and so
das
one
Modell
person
vor
has
kurzem von einem ehemaligen
got
Schüler
involved, and I had this example from a
gehört, dass
former
er schon dort
pupil
sich eingearbeitet
that
hat
he
in der
really worked.
Familie, Religionsunterricht,
He was
pastorale
doing religious
Tätigkeiten
education,
und plötzlich
pastoral
kamen
work, and
andere
so on.
Pfarrer und
And
er
all of a
wollte
sudden, they had
einfach nicht.
another
Und da
priest,
musste er
and then
aufgeben.
he had to go
Also dazu
and to give up.
brauchte man gesunde Strukturen,
So you need really healthy
von
structures.
Bischofskonferenz her
Coming
gesicherte
so something
Zielsetzungen,
that
wie
is
man
safe, a
da
clear systematic
weitergeht.
approach from the bishops' conference how to proceed there.
Ich habe die Frage jetzt nicht so verstanden, dass es
So I didn't understand it that it's about ordained people like permanent deacons. I understood it also from a German perspective. How about members of a religious council, other like Kolping, for example,
Ja, es gibt
also
auch
women's
hier
communities
so
and so on.
ländliche Vereine auf ländlichen Gegenden
Yeah, in rural
sind die
areas,
natürlich nicht allzu aktiv
they are not so
oder
active
teilweise
there.
sind einige. Und in städtischen größeren Vereinen,
But in
da
larger
gibt es
parishes in
viel
the
mehr.
cities, there is much
Alle
more like
Bewegungen
this.
sind da bei uns. Die
So we have all sorts of
Weltbewegung
different
und Feminist
movements there.
Und die sind auch aktiv und in ihrem Bereich schaffen
So
sie viel.
and they are active and they achieve a lot in their areas. And the
Jeder Pfarrer muss einen
the
Kirchenrat
councils, it's also
und
different
die
because
tatsächlich
every priest
etwas
has
zu
to
tun
have that,
haben,
but whether they have a
womit sie
say or not,
beauftragt werden oder nicht,
whether they are
das hängt vom
asked
Pfarrer
about
ab.
things, this really depends
Und da
strongly on the
gibt es
priest.
wirklich wieder große Unterschiede.
And again, there are big differences there as well.
Vielleicht noch kurz dazu.
Maybe
Das
briefly
ist eher aus
something.
eigener Erfahrung.
So this is more my personal experience.
Also gerade diese 30, 40, ich denke,
So
wenn
the people
jemand
between
Zeit
30 and
und
40,
Lust hat, ich habe zumindest diese
if
Erfahrung gemacht, dass
people have
man
the
dann
time, I have made this
viele
experience
Möglichkeiten hat,
that
sich
you have
einzusetzen
lots of possibilities to
in
get involved
dem Pfarrerbereich, in der Pfarrei. Das Problem ist
in the
oft, dass
parish. The
das gerade
problem is
diese Alter
rather
ist, dass wo man viele
that this
Kinder hat,
is
dann
the age group where you have
nicht so
children, for
verfügbar,
example, and then you do not
dass
have
es
so much
Priorität
extra
hat.
time.
Also zum Beispiel
That's rather
meine Pfarrei
so. In my parish, for
ist
example,
der Pfarrrat, wie heißt das, Pfarramrat, sehr, sehr gemischt besetzt sind.
the
Es
church
gibt auch
council,
dabei
it's composed of very diverse people, right? We have younger, older people, male, female.
Ich sehe dabei kein Problem, ehrlich
So I
gesagt.
don't see a problem there
Seitens der Kirche, das ist vielmehr,
from the point of view of the church.
wenn der Kirche schrinkt oder beziehungsweise die Zahl der Gläubigen schrinkt, dann sind
So if the
gerade
number
junge
of
Generationen
believers
weniger
is
präsent.
shrinking, then of
Das
course
heißt,
fewer young
sie sind
people are
entweder gar
present.
nicht da
So
oder
either they are non-present
wenigen,
at
die da
all, or
sind,
the few
die
that
haben
are
dann
there,
alles selber zu tun.
they have to do
Weniger
everything
müssen andere
themselves.
mögliche Aufgaben
So
selber
fewer people then
tragen.
have more tasks.
Das ist aber, wie gesagt, das ist eher so meine eigene
But
Erfahrung.
that's rather my own experience.
Frau Kisch, können Sie aus Ihrer Erfahrung heraus
So Ms. Kish,
ergänzen?
can you add something from your personal experience?
Ja, ich würde vielleicht nur einfach hinzufügen,
So I would like to add maybe
dass es in Ungarn
that in
viele
Hungary
Probleme sind. Es gibt natürlich
there
viele sehr
are lots of problems.
beeindruckende Entwicklungen und
Of course, there are quite some
Leistungen, aber auch sehr
impressive
viele
developments,
Probleme mit
but also lots of problems.
allgemein mit gesellschaftlichem Engagement.
Well, in general, with
Die
honorary
Bürger
work
sind,
and
der
commitment for the
Soziologe sagt
society.
bereits,
And
dass,
the
dass es
sociologist is already
vielleicht
nodding
stimmen
his
kann.
head.
Ja,
He's agreeing with me.
damit gibt es Probleme, also mit
So
der
there's
Aktivität der
problem with the
Gesellschaft.
commitment of the people,
Im
activity
Allgemeinen,
for
und es
societies.
ist auf viele Faktoren
And
wahrscheinlich
of course, this
zurückzuführen.
can be traced back to many
Auch,
different
dass
factors.
diese Kultur in Ungarn einfach
Also
lange nicht
that the culture in
entwickeln
Hungary,
konnte.
we were not
Dann
able to
nach der
develop this.
politischen
And so
Wende
after the political
einfach sich
change, then
nicht unbedingt schnell in die richtige Richtung
somehow it did not develop in the right direction
Ich denke, dass auch
quickly.
Wirtschaftsprobleme können
And
dazu beitragen.
I think also
wenn
economic
man
problems could be a
Arbeitsstellen
reason.
hat oder
So if you have to
2
work
und 15
two
Stunden
jobs
arbeitet,
and
dann
work
ist
for
es
50 hours, for example,
schwieriger, sich
then of
in
course
der
it's
Kirche oder
difficult to commit
engagieren.
or
Also ich
do
denke, das gehört
honor,
auch dazu.
honorary work at the church or in other areas.
Ist dann schwerer,
Well, the
Last
civic
der
society,
kommunistischen Erbe, kann man so sagen.
so there's a
Nicht nur in
burden of
Ungarn,
the
sondern generell in
communist heritage,
Osteuropa.
not just in Hungary, but in all of Eastern Europe.
Man muss auch hinzufügen,
And we also have to add that
dass wenn jemand aktiv ist,
if
dann
somebody is
sind
active
also im Zivilbereich sind zwei
in
zwei
civic,
große
in civic areas, we have two big
gesellschaftliche Akteure.
types of
Einmal Sport
civic
einmal
agents.
Kirche.
It
Das
could
sind
be
die zwei
sports or
starken
church.
Faktoren.
So these are the two strong players there.
Also
And we even have
zahlenmäßig
figures for that.
sind das die zwei größten Akteure,
So these are
wo
the
sich
two biggest
Menschen
protagonists
auf irgendeine Weise
where
einsetzen.
people get involved in one way or the other.
Gibt es darüber hinaus noch weiteres zivilgesellschaftliches Engagement?
Is there other
in Ungarn,
civic
außer jetzt
commitment in
Teams und
Hungary
Sport?
except for sports and church?
Oder, beziehungsweise,
Yes.
wenn Sie Kirche sagen,
Because if you say church,
meinen Sie damit auch dann auch Caritas, also auch
so is it also
Werke, oder
Caritas
Kirche im Sinne der Mitarbeit in
charity, or is
Nein,
it
ich denke zum Beispiel, einer der größten ist,
so one of the
sind die
biggest
Malteser.
are the Maltese,
Dort sind sehr viele aktiv.
the
Auch
relief
nicht nur im katholischen, aber zum
service,
Beispiel
and
die Baptisten sind
and it's
auch
not just Catholics,
sehr
it also
aktiv.
Baptists also very active, for example.
Wie heißt das? Katholicus, der hat sogar katholischer
Katholische Malteser Hilfs
Nein, nicht. Es gibt eine zentrale.
Well, also there's this.
Katholische Hilfswerk, danke.
So there's a Catholic relief agency that, Caritas as well.
Jeden Pfarrgemeinde eine Caritas-Gemeinschaft, so viel ich
So
weiß.
almost every parish there's a Caritas community, but it's rather elderly ladies that are active there.
Ein wichtiger Bestandteil.
But this is also an important part of community life. Well, I'm not the expert for this, but I see that there are more and more environmental organizations that come up.
Was am Ort und Stelle zu machen ist.
So things that can be done on the spot then locally. This is also important for people. Okay, there's another question in the chat. So the Hungarian Catholic Church, after the World Synod in Rome, what kind of conclusion do you draw? Is this important? Or this is quite diverse how this is seen. Some dioceses were really thrilled and did a lot, and others it was not so much. But how it will go on, this is the question. So we have this final document already. We do not have an official translation yet, but the most focal points are already there, how we could continue. And from my point of view, I can give you a short report. We are a small diocese, just 15 parishes, but the people were really enthusiastic about this idea of the synod. So I said, well, form teams with the parishes and talk about these topics, things that affect the church and that are important for you. And in these 15 parishes, they brought forth more than 100 groups, and the people wrote minutes and so on. And so this created something that I forwarded then. But the main question has always been, how will we decide? So what will be the final outcome? How can we have an influence? Or is it a top-bottom approach then? This was also a question of the bishops, by the way. What will be our role in this whole story? And there were also quite difficult questions. For example, ordaining women, for example, and other things. But I think it still needs some elaboration how to continue. But I see huge opportunities there, that our parishes can become more active and really, determine their own path. But like always in the Hungarian church, you can do everything or maybe also nothing. So you always have these two options. So the bishops' conference, did they deal with this? Of course. So we compiled a document that was passed on. But I would say this was not our main topic. So to be polite about it. So this topic of the synod, was this really something that was read in the media, or was it very marginal? It was very marginal. So there was not a big reporting on this. But this has to do with the fact that
in der Lage war, dass dieses Thema ein bisschen nachzuforschen.
I did not have access to
Aber ja,
lots of
es war
information
tatsächlich
regarding this
dann mit der
topic.
Diskussion.
But again, it was really
Nicht so ein
marginal,
großes Thema wie in Deutschland.
so not as big as in Germany, for example.
Ich als einfacher Leser würde sagen, dass es
So as a
sicherlich
simple
nicht unter
reader,
den
I would
ersten
say
20
that
wichtigsten
it was
Themen.
not among the 20
War
most important topics,
gab's
for example.
Berichterstattung,
Maybe there
ich
were
sehe,
some
dass es
reports
auch so
about
war,
it,
dass auch
but
so,
what I see is
ich würde sagen, unabhängige oder kritische Medien mit
that independent or
kirchlichen
critical
Themen sich
media,
beschäftigen. Und
uh,
das ist, aber
they might deal with church topics.
ja, Skandalen stehen eher im Mittelpunkt, würde ich
But
sagen.
I think scandals, of course, they get more attention.
Andererseits, genau, hier schreibt Akko Spitter, dass es auch
Somebody is
bei
writing
Fidesz
here
ein kritischer oder unabhängiger Portal,
that Telex is a critical independent portal, cooperation with Sam Lelek,
katholische Webseite hat. Sie
that they have a
greifen Themen
critical
auf. Und das
website.
ist
They
wahr.
take up topics, and
Aber
that's
ich
true.
würde denken, dass man als
But I'd rather think
Christ, als
that
Nichtgläubiger, der
a
sich
non-Christian,
vielleicht
a
von außen
non-believer,
sich für kirchliche Themen interessiert,
somebody who
im
would be
Mainstream-Medien
interested
das
in church
eher
topics,
über neulichen Skandalen wahrnimmt.
what they perceive from the church is more the scandals and nothing else. So internally in the church, this is the most important question for me. So it's like the Second Vatican Council, how this is going to be continued. And these are the most important questions that come up. And we have not asked these questions yet. What have we done wrong in recent years? So where did we do things wrongly, and where could we improve? And it would be important if you talked directly with people. But if we do not ask people about things like disgrace, then we don't get answers. So when I look at the clock, I still have a last question. What kind of hopes do you have as regards to Hungarian society and the church? So what do you hope for?
Gottes Gnade. Ich erhoffe Gottes Gnade.
I hope for God's mercy.
Kurz, knapp und prägnant.
Well, that was short, okay.
Ja, ich denke, dass die Kirche ihre prophetische Rolle
so that the church can maintain its prophetic role.
Und dadurch kann der Gesellschaft auch eine Hilfe leisten.
And this way it could also be of assistance for the society.
Ich würde so formulieren, dass
I would say that this synodal approach of Pope Francis
innerhalb der ungarischen Kirche weiter verbreitet und
that this would be spread more within the Hungarian church,
Unterstützung findet,
and that it would be supported more on all levels. Thank you, Ms. Kish.
Sowohl der Gesellschaft als auch der Kirche.
Both society and church, what I wish for them is that they are independent, that they are courageous, that they are credible, that lots of critical discussions, and lots of empathy and patience. And even more things, but I think it's enough. And yes, of course, less division. Yes.
Ja, sehr schön.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much for this discussion. Thank you for everyone who participated, asked questions, and so on. So I should like to wish you a pleasant evening, and I hope that we gave you food for thought, so that you can create your own ideas, find your own ideas. So thank you very much. Have a good evening.